Hi there, I'm Lou.
And I'm Lee.
And this is Uncovering History. Hello everyone and welcome back to our 12th episode, Jeffrey Dahmer Part 2. As always, I'll start off by stating that this episode will contain content of a graphic nature. However, we are in no way attempting to glorify the murders or the murderer. So, we'll continue from where we stopped in the last episode, which was Dahmer's 12th murder, the horrific and heinous attack aimed at Tony Anthony Hughes. We'll continue on with a rise in complaints occurring throughout the apartment block that Dahmer resided in.
Hello everyone. Yes, so at the end of the last episode we stopped by discussing the complaints that were coming in from other tenants within the flat. Now Dahmer was complained to on multiple occasions and made up excuses stating that he would fix them. However, this never occurred. So as a result, we'll continue from that point. So during the afternoon of May the 26th, 1991, Dahmer introduced himself to 14-year-old Konarak Synthosone on Wisconsin Avenue. Now, Konarak was the younger brother of the victim that Dahmer had molested and then took to hospital. This happened as a result of his grandmother interrupting his plans and ordered him to leave. Now, this is something that we discussed in episode 1. Now, Dahmer seduced Konarak with the idea of money for photos. Now, initially he was reluctant, but eventually went with him. And now I warn you, this next part is harrowing. Now, Dahmer took photos of Konarak while he posed in his underwear before drugging him and performing oral sex on his unconscious body. During this time, Dahmer drilled a single hole into Konarak's skull, where he injected hydrochloric acid, as before. This time, he chose the frontal lobe. This was taking place next to the now bloated corpse of victim Tony Anthony Hughes, who had been savagely murdered just 2 days before. While unconscious, Dahmer lay next to both bodies, consuming multiple beers. He then left the apartment to drink at a bar, leaving both victims in his bedroom.
I have no words. That is horrific.
Well, it's going to get worse, unfortunately. So in the early hours of May the 27th, Dahmer returned towards his apartment when he noticed Konarak naked on the corner of the 25th Street, being consoled by 3 young women. Dahmer approached the women, stating that Konarak was his friend, while attempting to lead him back to the apartment. 3 women refused while telling Dahmer that they had called 911. 3 Milwaukee police officers arrived shortly after, to which Dahmer began telling the story of how this was his 19-year-old boyfriend, who was inebriated and often pulled stunts like this while drunk. He also mentioned how he just wanted to get him home. The women continued to protest while telling the officers that he had blood around his testicles and rectum, and that he had struggled against Dahmer, to which they responded, "Shut the hell up and do not interfere." The officers covered Konarak with a towel and accompanied Dahmer to his apartment. To further attempt to showcase that this was his boyfriend, Dahmer showed the police the photos he had taken earlier, which is another huge red flag for the police which wasn't picked up.
I just don't understand how they're not listening to the women.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that, but one of the officers noted an odd smell but did not check the apartment at all. He simply popped his head around the corner without taking a good look. And now, the officers, now satisfied, left the apartment. The incident was noted as a domestic dispute. Once the officers had left, Dahmer once again injected hydrochloric acid into his brain. However, on this occasion, the injection would be fatal. Tragically, Konarak succumbed to his horrible ordeal, becoming Dahmer's 13th victim. And, even in a more sinister state, the following day, Dahmer took the day off work to dismember both the bodies of Tony and Konarak. He retained both of the victims' skulls.
I just... How frustrating. You've got police officers literally at the crime scene. There's one of them that's even smelled something that doesn't smell right. And, they should know that that is not a good smell, which would need investigating.
Yeah, I know. The police officers have fallen short here massively. I mean, to start off with, the young boy was clearly injured and distressed. The first thing they should have done was get him checked out of hospital to at least make sure that his wounds weren't life-threatening and that he could also be cared for. And the last thing you would do is leave them in the company of someone who people are already stating is not a part of him or with him, and then ignoring things like foul smells that are coming from an apartment that you're about to leave someone who's injured in.
I mean, the first thing they should have done is find some sort of ID, identify this person, because if they found out that he was 14, I'm sure this would have had a different outcome.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they ignorantly took Dahmer's word saying he was 19, and even when the women spoke up and said, this is wrong, the police officers told them to shut up and not interfere. So immediately they'd taken the side of Dahmer being someone who was trying to console. So once again, he's very, very good at playing the role of, well, in his case, he was playing almost the role of the victim. This is my friend, I've come to try and help him, please let me just take him home so I can take care of him,
Yeah, and then that didn't work, and then he basically said it was his boyfriend to the police.
Yeah, he's completely changing his role, and yeah, it's severe negligence from the police officers. But we will carry on, and we now move on to June 30th, 1991, where 20-year-old Matt Cleveland Turner was attending a Chicago Pride Parade. At a bus stop, Dahmer introduced himself, asking him to pose for a photo shoot. Turner was lured back to Dahmer's apartment, where he was drugged, strangled, and dismembered in the bathtub. Matt's head and internal organs were put in the freezer, and his torso was also placed in a 57-gallon drum that Dahmer had recently purchased. Matt Cleveland Turner was also never reported missing. And this once again just goes back to the fact that he's preying on vulnerable people. And this just shows, and it really is tragic. And just a few days later, on the 5th of July 1991, 23-year-old Jeremiah Benjamin Weinberger met Dahmer at a gay bar in Chicago, where he agreed to accompany him to Milwaukee, which was Dahmer's residence, for the weekend. In another sinister act, Dahmer injected boiling hot water into a cavity that Dahmer had drilled into in his skull. This act was performed twice, putting Jeremiah into a coma, which he would tragically pass away from 2 days later. Dahmer confessed that the death was exceptional, as he was the only victim to have died with his eyes open. Jeremiah's body was kept in the bathtub for almost a week before his head was decapitated and his body was dismembered. His torso was also put into the 57-gallon drum.
I just don't know what's wrong with this person.
Yeah, no, the depravity and the violence is escalating very quickly, and you can even see that he's started picking up additional tools such as the 57-gallon drum, which is another way of preserving the body in his own way.
It's disgusting.
It is. It really is. So again, only 10 days later, 24-year-old Oliver Joseph Lacey, a bodybuilding enthusiast, caught the eye of Dahmer, to which he once again offered Oliver money if he would pose for photographs. Oliver was subsequently drugged and strangled with a leather strap before his head was decapitated and his heart was placed in the fridge for later consumption. His skeleton was kept to aid the creation of a shrine of skulls that Dahmer was in the process of creating.
What? It's just... I'm done with him. This is awful. This is just awful.
Yeah, so he was in the process of creating a shrine so that, and we come on to it a bit later, but he could do things such as meditate and console himself and just process what was going on. It was like in interviews he stated as it was his safe place, something that he could build to, remember his victims in the most sickest way possible.
I just don't understand how, yeah, he didn't have a good childhood, but he wasn't abused, He has a very different upbringing to our other horrible serial killers. And yet he's just displayed some horrific crimes. I just don't get it, how he's developed from being, a sad little boy to being this depraved murderer.
Well, in his head he's been able to justify his actions, and that's half the issue really, because in his mind what he's doing is necessary. And that's often the problem with serial killers, that what they're doing they believe to be correct. And it's just a case of where is their stopping point, and unfortunately their stopping point tends to be where they are killed or arrested. And this is something that we'll dig into a little later with Dahmer as well. But once again, just 4 days later, continuing the pattern of minimising time between victims, 25-year-old Joseph Arthur Braidhoft would become Dahmer's 17th and last victim. Joseph was a father of 3 in search of work in Milwaukee during the murder. Joseph was horrifically strangled and left to die on Dahmer's bed for 2 days. When he returned, the head of Joseph was covered in maggots. Dahmer decapitated his final victim before cleaning the head. He then placed the head in the fridge. He then also put Joseph's torso in the 57-gallon drum to be acidified.
2 days dying in absolute pain. Where are the police? They've got these people going missing, constantly. Where are the police?
Well, it's the shortcomings, really, isn't it? Because there's been so many red flags. There's been the complaints. There's been the smells in his grandmother's house. There's been the smells in his apartment flat. There's been the police officers that haven't done their due diligence and taken the young boy to hospital. They also didn't look into Dahmer as a potentially dangerous suspect who's just randomly appeared, taking ownership of this young boy. And there's a plethora of other situations where more should have been done. But ultimately, what we see time and time again is that not enough is done at the right times. And that can even further stem back to the point where he's been arrested multiple times and put on the sex offenders list, but still, nothing has been done.
Awful. It's infuriating.
But we now move on to Dahmer's subsequent arrest.
Good.
Now, on July the 22nd, 1991, Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to accompany him to his apartment to again pose for nude photographs, drink beer, and keep him company. This was unlike his usual routine, as 3 presented a much higher risk of failure, as opposed to the normal 1 victim that he would attempt to seduce.
So what's happening here? Is he getting, too confident?
So, yeah, I think he's getting more confident, he's becoming more arrogant, and his thirst is growing.
Audacious.
It's very twisted. So one of the 3 men, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, agreed to go back to Dahmer's apartment. Upon entering, he noted a foul smell and other unsettling items, such as boxes of hydrochloric acid. Dahmer palmed this off with an excuse that it was used to clean and maintain bricks, which was accepted. After continued dialogue, Dahmer convinced Tracy to go to his bedroom to take some photos. During this time, Dahmer also handcuffed one of his wrists, while unsuccessfully attempting to cuff the other. Tracy noted pictures of naked men on posters on the wall, while The Exorcist 3 was playing on in a videotape in the background. And now it should be noted that Dahmer used to watch The Exorcist Part 3 often, as it said it boosted his desire to go out and kill. He felt one with the film.
I've never seen it. Probably never will after this.
It was at this moment that Tracy also noticed the 57-gallon drum in the corner, which was emitting a foul, odorous smell. Seeing Tracy uncomfortable, Dahmer revealed a knife, which he held to Tracy's stomach while listening to his heartbeat. During this incredibly inappropriate and violent engagement, Dahmer also openly stated that he was going to eat his heart. In an attempt to subdue Dahmer, Tracy continuously repeated that he was his friend and that he had no intention of running away. However, in his mind, he was already planning his escape. Tracy asked to use the bathroom while querying if they could both sit in the living room, where there was air conditioning, so they could have a beer together. When Tracy stood up, he noticed that Dahmer was no longer holding the handcuffs, and it was this moment where he chose to strike. Tracy punched Dahmer in the mouth before unlocking and running out the front door.
Oh my god, this is tense.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot of courage not to just, scream or just, get really uncomfortable and kind of provoke his attack. Whereas he kind of managed to, subdue Dahmer and then, executed his own plan.
Yeah, the roles were kind of reversed in this sense because Dahmer let his guard down and became vulnerable himself, and he played it really cool. He was smart, he was calculated, and like you said, instead of panicking, he thought his situation through to buy himself time.
That takes immense bravery.
Yeah, absolutely, very brave. And at approximately 11:30 p.m, after successfully escaping, Tracy was able to get the attention of nearby officers, where he explained that a freak had handcuffed him. The police officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller, were unable to remove the handcuffs, but agreed that Tracy should show them exactly where he had escaped from. When the officers arrived, Dahmer invited the 3 of them inside while openly admitting that he had in fact put the handcuffs on Tracy. Tracy also noted the knife that Dahmer had previously revealed in an attempt to threaten. Now, Dahmer told the officers where the keys were in the bedroom, and while Officer Mueller attempted to enter, he noticed a large knife under the bed and an open drawer full of printed photos. The decor of the house was also identical to the photos, and many of the photos contained dismembered bodies in different stages of Dahmer's process to remove any trace of evidence. Mueller walked back into the living room as calmly as possible while uttering the words to his partner, "These are for real." Dahmer immediately attempted to resist arrest. However, the officers quickly overpowered him and were able to subsequently handcuff his hands behind his back. A call for backup was also made, and at this point, in the events that were unfolding, Mueller opened a fridge to find a freshly severed head of a black male on the shelf. While pinned down on the floor, Dahmer muttered, "For what I did, I should be dead."
My God.
So once again, he knows what he's doing is bad, but he was unable to stop, and it was getting out of control, so this needed to happen.
Could you imagine being those police officers?
Well, yeah, I mean, how would you react? It's something that most police officers will never see in their lifetime. Many of them never even come across something like a murder or a death or something severe. So to find this it'd be harrowing. It'd be a test of all of your training and your calmness to be able to get through the situation.
And the fact that he managed to walk back into the room calmly.
I know. Now, an extensive search of the apartment took place, and this was conducted by the Milwaukee Police's Criminal Investigation Bureau. The search revealed 2 entire skeletons, a mummified scalp, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved penises, 4 severed heads in Dahmer's kitchen, 7 skulls, some bleached and preserved, and others painted in a closet, and a tray that had collected blood drippings at the bottom of the fridge, alongside 2 human hearts, some arm muscle, each wrapped up in their own individual bags. In Dahmer's fridge freezer, a bag of human organs, including livers and hearts, were discovered alongside a frozen torso. Flesh was also stuck to the bottom of the freezer. The 57-gallon drum was also found, which contained the 3 dismembered torsos from previous victims.
This is just too much. It's too much.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and you're really starting to see how sadistic of an individual Jeffrey Dahmer actually was. It's shocking.
Just thank goodness that he got caught.
Well, fortunately, these 2 police officers, they did their job. They did it perfectly.
I hope they got promoted.
They understood the severity of the situation. They very quickly recognised that something wasn't right, and they investigated as they've been trained to do so. Now, if the other 3 police officers had have also done that, then maybe some lives could have been spared, and it really is tragic, but I'm just glad that these 2 officers did their job.
Absolutely.
So we'll now move on to his confessions. So in total, beginning on July the 23rd, 1991, Dahmer was interrogated and questioned for over 60 hours. Now initially, he was questioned by Detective Patrick Kennedy, who was later joined by Detective Dennis Murphy. Throughout this entire process, Dahmer chose not to have a lawyer present while maintaining that he had done wrong and that he needed to confess. During these 60 hours, Dahmer would admit to the killing of 16 boys and men in Wisconsin and 1 male in Ohio, this being his first. Now again, graphic content to follow. His process was meticulous and structured, sticking to the process of rendering his victim unconscious before strangling them to death. However, a few of his victims died due to the injects into his brain, namely boiling water or acid. Dahmer regularly partook in necrophilia, especially during dismemberment. Dahmer openly stated that the blood would pool to the chest, and as such, he would hang the torso to ensure exsanguination. The organs and bones that Dahmer did not wish to keep were diced and disposed of, or pulverized, respectively. Dahmer also shockingly admitted to cannibalism and performing sexual acts on viscera post-mortem, mostly the heart and liver. During the confessions, Dahmer noted how his impulses were growing soon before he was caught. This would sadly explain the brutality displayed in the months leading up to his arrest. Dahmer was also noted saying in another interview that, "I did not believe I would ever stop." Alongside this, Dahmer also spoke of the multitude of photos that were taken during this process. Now on November the 18th in 1991, while being questioned by the police, with reference to the shrine that Dahmer was attempting to build, he stated that it was to become a place for meditation had his arrest occurred 6 months later.
I mean, obviously it's really good that he's been arrested, but I mean, for the people having to listen to his confessions, it must have been really difficult.
Yeah, once again, it's something that you would never typically hear. And at this point, Dahmer was very, very happy to confess everything. So there was very, very graphic details being given to the police, and I don't think they were ready for it. Typically, you wouldn't see someone confess that much. So yeah, it would have been harrowing. But we'll now move on to his trial. And on January the 30th, 1992, Dahmer was tried in Milwaukee, where the crimes had been committed for 15 counts of first-degree murder. He had initially pled guilty to 13 counts on January the 13th, while waiving right to counsel or support. Defendants tried to push for support, quoting that he was insane due to his abundance of necrophiliac desires. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Philip Resnick testified during the trial that Dahmer did not suffer from primary necrophilia because he preferred live sexual partners, as evidenced by his efforts to create unresistant, submissive sexual partners devoid of rational thought and to whose needs he did not have to cater. This is common practice, though, for a defendant to go for the insanity plea.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I saw that coming.
There's lots and lots of evidence mounting against him even before his confession, so the only thing his defendants have left is to go for the insanity plea.
Does the insanity plea take away the death penalty?
Usually that's what they go for, yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
It gets changed to life in prison without the chance of parole, or life in prison to be served consecutively instead of the death penalty. Or in very extreme cases, they can be moved to a mental institute and then released 20, 25, 30 years later. But someone of his violence would not be considered for something revolving around parole or being released.
Do you think he was insane?
No, he was pathological. He was very intelligent and meticulous, and he knew exactly what he was doing. And he probably wouldn't have stopped. That's probably true what he said. So it really is, the two police officers did amazing. So, further to Dr. Resnick's testimonial, on February the 13th, forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz further added that he did not believe Dahmer to be suffering from any mental disease or defect at the time that he was committing the crimes, stating Dahmer went to great lengths to be alone with his victim and to have no witnesses. There was definitely premeditation here, specifically around later additions such as the 57-gallon drum and the attempt to create a shrine. So in total, the trial lasted 2 weeks, and on February the 15th, the court would hear the verdict, that being that Dahmer was ruled to be sane and not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of each of the 15 murders. However, 2 of the jurors dissented. The date of the 17th was created for formal sentencing due to a postponement, and on the 17th, Dahmer was allowed to vocalize his thoughts, and he stated none of the murders had been motivated by hatred and that he wished for his own death. He also noted that he understood that society would never forgive him, but he hoped God would.
Wow. I mean, again, so he's kind of shifting away from this insanity plea. He's vocalizing that he understands how awful these crimes are or have been. But I don't understand why he's God-fearing.
So I can't answer the last bit, but it wasn't really ever part of his mantra to go for insanity. I think it was just defendants' desperation, knowing the fact that they had nothing else, as the evidence was so concrete that there was nothing they could bring up to say, oh, it wasn't Dahmer, he wasn't here at the time, because it was so very clear he was. So Dahmer was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years upon the first 2 counts, with the remaining 13 sentences to carry a mandatory life imprisonment sentence plus 70 years. The death penalty was not considered, as it had been abolished in Wisconsin in 1853.
Yeah, so it's one of these states that obviously didn't have the death penalty.
Yeah, as each state practically runs as its own little small country. Not all of them have the death penalty. Roughly 3 months after the sentencing, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio to stand trial for the murder of Stephen Hicks. In a court hearing that lasted just 45 minutes, Dahmer again pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a 16th time of life imprisonment on May the 1st, 1992.
So, I mean, he's racking up the years, which is good. We want him off the street. We want him away from vulnerable people.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's going to, at this point, he has been sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. There's no chance of parole. There's no chance of getting out early. He just has to do the time. But we'll now move on to Dahmer's imprisonment and his subsequent death. Now, upon sentencing, Dahmer was moved to the Columbia Correctional Facility, and for his first year behind bars, he was held under solitary confinement due to concerns of his physical safety anywhere else in the prison. Given the nature of his crimes, it would not be unheard of for other prison inmates to attempt to obtain justice through means of violence. As with many other inmates, Dahmer found Christianity in prison and became, in his eyes, a born-again Christian. Also, from his father's wishes, he also read into creationism from the Institute of Creation Research. Now, in May 1994, Dahmer was baptized. And during this time, multiple discussions occurred where he pondered if in fact he was sinning by remaining alive. In his eyes, it was a sin. Now, on the morning of November the 28th, 1994, Dahmer left his cell, as he normally would, to partake in his assigned work detail. With him on this day were two other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The trio were left unsupervised in the shower, as had been the case on many other days. At approximately 8:10 a.m. that morning, Dahmer was found on the floor of the bathrooms with extreme head wounds. He had been bludgeoned across portions of his face and head with a 20-inch metal bar. He had also been violently slammed into a wall, head first. Dahmer was still breathing, and as such was rushed to a nearby hospital, but was pronounced dead just 1 hour later. Jesse Anderson had also been beaten, with the same weapon showcasing the same injuries. He would also later die 2 days later, in hospital from his severe wounds.
Wow, okay. So, I mean, do we know much about this Jesse Anderson?
No, but we will get into it a little bit more in a minute.
Okay.
So Christopher Scarver admitted to the murders of Dahmer and Anderson, claiming that God had told him to do it. In a later testimony in 2015, Scarver stated that the violence and subsequent murders had occurred as a result of a disagreement between the three, involving Scarver feeling undermined and humiliated from being poked and laughed at. Scarver also noted that he confronted Dahmer with a newspaper, demanding to know if the claims of his violent spree were real or not. Scarver also went on to note that Dahmer had not repented and would undergo acts of taunting, such as creating the impression of severed limbs from food while using ketchup to simulate blood. Dahmer would also leave these creations in places where many would end up finding them, with the perceived goal of causing distress.
So, I mean, that's one way to not make friends in prison.
Yeah, I mean, he's already got a really bad reputation. And to create such public displays as what he was doing just shows that he's correct. He hasn't repented.
No.
He probably doesn't feel guilty for what he's done.
Well, his actions are showing that he's not bothered.
Yeah, and because he can't physically do what he used to do, he's trying to do it in any other way that he possibly can. And in this case, it's creating imitations.
Almost like an obsession.
Absolutely. Well, it consumed him. This was his life. And yet his life was deemed to be worthless because of how he acted and how he treated other people. But on August the 5th, 1991, when the nature of Dahmer's heinous crimes came to light, a candlelight vigil was held to heal the Milwaukee community. This was attended by more than 400 people, with members of the victims' families also attending. As a result of where the vicious crimes had taken place, in November 1992, the apartments were demolished. To this day, the site remains unused, with initial plans to create a memorial garden never materializing. In 1994, Lionel Dahmer published a book titled A Father's Story and donated a portion of the proceeds to the victims' families. Both Lionel and his second wife, Shari, refused to change their name while professing their love for Dahmer, irrespective of his crimes. Lionel was subsequently sued by two families for not receiving the appropriate consent from them prior to publishing. A third lawsuit was also actioned and created for Stephen Hicks, citing parental negligence as the cause of the claim.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Jeffrey Dahmer's father creating a book.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, donating a portion of the proceeds to the victim's family, that's good. However, this kind of also looks like maybe they're trying to cash in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. There's some good incentives, not good incentives, but there's good things coming from this, in that the victims' families are receiving some money. But yes, he's definitely piggybacking on the destruction of his son to turn a profit, or at least that's what it looks like.
And I know what you said about them, never saying that they don't love him, but I just don't understand how you could still love someone. I
guess at the end of the day, it was his son, and even though his son was an awful person, he was still his son. So based on that, he was like, I'm still going to love him,
Oh, God, I just don't know how you would say that after everything that they've done.
I don't know either, to be honest. It's definitely a very difficult situation, and I guess the pressure that anyone connected to Dharma afterwards would have been immense, because people would naturally project their hate onto the family because they can't project it onto Dharma himself. So yeah, it's a situation that I can't relate to, and I couldn't begin to understand what everyone was going through, be it the victims' families or the family of Dharma, or just people that were connected to him without even meaning to be. It's a very, very complex situation. And I'd like to end part 2 with 2 chilling quotes that really amplifies the evil nature of Dharma. So in 1993, during the televised interview with Inside Edition, he was asked, "When you killed these men, afterwards were you repulsed? Were you upset?" To which Dharma, with a plain, calculated face, responded, No, not at the time. It was almost addictive. It was a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs. I just had full control of the situation. And the second question asked was, "Why did you take the photos?" To which Dharma calmly responded again, "It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I wanted, if I couldn't keep them there with me, their whole, that I could at least keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with 10 different skulls and skeletons."
That's awful.
Yeah, so even during the interviews, he's already confessed a plethora of times. He spent over 60 hours being interviewed. He's bared everything. Everything is available and open. He's kept nothing behind. But even in these moments when you think you know everything, he's still able to, still shock you.
But there's still nothing of any sort of remorse.
No, so there's quite a few interviews that took place, and throughout all of them you can see that he knows what he did is wrong, and he can appreciate the fact that, the murder and the violence is not acceptable. But at the same time, in his mindset, he didn't see it as wrong because it was what he wanted to do. So it's kind of like a warped perception.
Well, the whole story, has been horrendous from the beginning, even to the end, even with those final quotes. I just, I find it very difficult to understand the mindset of people that commit these sorts of crimes, especially without having any sort of guilt or even empathy towards the victims' families, anything.
Well, that's what differs me and you from the conventional serial killer, because we can clearly see that his actions are wrong, immoral, and it's not something we would ever replicate.
They're not just wrong. They are deplorable.
Okay, yes. But what I mean is that we would never do such a thing because we know it's not the right decision to make. However, in his eyes, he's been able to turn off a switch that although he knows it's wrong, that doesn't factor into his decision-making. His decision-making was purely on impulse, desire, and thirst for killing, effectively.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of part 2 of Jeffrey Dahmer. These 2 episodes have included some really horrible events that shocked the world to its very core. This was a case that was televised globally, and all were able to see his lack of a moral compass, his inability to act with respect or dignity, and his inability to function like a normal human being. From a young age, red flags were missed, red flags that would ultimately cost the lives of 17 innocent boys and men. A truly, truly shocking list of events that should have never been able to occur. So I just hope that going forward, red flags like these can be identified earlier or actually reported to the point where actions can be taken before we see events like this occur again.
Exactly, and it's important that we continue to study and learn from these events so that hopefully in the future we'll be able to catch, or the police or investigators or behavioural analysts will be able to detect and stop crimes before they are potentially going to occur.
Okay, so what have we got coming up next?
So for our next episode, we'll work through the life of Dennis Nielsen, or the Muswell Hill murderer. Now, Dennis Nielsen was a prolific Scottish serial killer that resided in North London. Through this case and the research deducted, we'll also see some strong similarities to Dahmer in a number of ways. We'll discuss this in more detail in the next episode, which will be next Saturday.
Okay, so another serial killer. Can't wait.
Yeah, no. So we'll be continuing the trend of true crime, yes.
Okay, so as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, you can contact us at uncoveringhistory.co.uk, or you can send us an email directly to uncoveringhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Also, make sure to check out our Instagram page to keep up to date at Uncovering History Podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in again, and we'll see you very soon for our next episode.
Yep, thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
See you later.